for joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and start the recording, so this will be accessed later. We're really excited to present to you today some strategies for cultivating more community support for your programs. This is Michelle Rich with the Iowa Afterschool Alliance, and my colleague Brittany is here as well.
Hi, everyone.
We had the pleasure of attending a fabulous training last week in Kansas City, held by our funder, the Mott Foundation, for after-school networks across the country on fundraising. And the trainer was the fundraising school out of Indiana University and Purdue University in Indiana. And we feel that a lot of the strategies that were discussed at the training and that we probably use in our day-to-day and in our higher strategies in our programs are really useful for developing more community partners for your program. So today our goal really is to learn about fundraising techniques that are research-based that can develop community contributions to your program in all forms. And we'll speak more to that here in a little bit. First, I wanted to start off with some definitions, and this will be especially important for those that are working through the issue of parent fees right now. With the new guidance from the Federal Department of Education, I know that programs have been somewhat challenged to supplant those parent fees with something else. So we're going to talk about this difference between program income and community partners. And Vic really wanted us to differentiate the two. First off, parent fees are a source of program income. And the key behind program income is that it must be spent before 21st century funds and by the end of the fiscal year. Community partners, on the other hand, any contributions of funds through grants, donations, programming, or products or services is not program income. So you have a lot more flexibility in the use of these funds. And so far, the Federal Department of Education has not provided guidance on this sort of donation area. So it's really a good practice to further develop community partners. And it's not just for current program income, but we're also thinking about the long-term strategy for sustainability, where even though you might not require donations of programming or products or services or grants, you may down the line. So that's something that we want to consider. And really, the idea of thinking about grants, donations, programming, or products and services as community partnership contributions, really, in fundraising speak, it's all an ask. So that's why we lump them together, and we are thinking about them holistically in this training. So why use a fundraising strategy instead of just a community partnership strategy? Well, first off, it's strategic. So it can help you plan out a roadmap for your vision for community partnerships. Second, it's trackable. So in your strategy, you will develop goals and objectives that help you identify benchmarks for your fundraising, as well as measures of performance for your fundraising strategy. So that will all be identifiable and trackable. Then third, a fundraising strategy based on the techniques given by the fundraising school are all research-based. So they're scientific. And this is all research done over many years of asking for individual, corporate, foundation contributions to programs and organizations. And finally, with a little planning, a fundraising strategy should make your life easier in that you have a good plan set out and it's trackable and based on research. So this helps you create some efficiency in what you're doing.
Great. And so now we'll go into kind of the details about what a fundraising strategy is. And so you'll see that we have this graphic here, and the first thing you'll notice about a fundraising strategy is that it's a cycle. It's never ending. So you'll be constantly going through the cycle and then kind of starting over with each new goal that you'll end up having. And again, we'll point out that this is the ideal for strategy. So it looks kind of cyclical, perfect in order, but we also realize that sometimes you might be jumping back and forth between different components in the fundraising strategy, and that's totally okay. So just a brief overview of the fundraising strategy. The first thing you'll do is identify the case. So thinking about what the problem is that you're hoping to address and how you'll solve it, and which is really kind of the motivator for the donor or the community partner. Evaluate your community, or so thinking about who your partners already are, how you can activate them, how you can gain new partners. Also just kind of looking at what else is happening in the community that might affect your fundraising efforts or other asks. So is there another big community-wide effort going on that might impact your strategy? Just those things are good to think about so you know what you're getting yourself into. The fundraising vehicle is the specific method that you'll use to make the ask, and Michelle will go into more detail about what that could look like. Solicit the gift is another way to say ask for the gift, and I will talk a little bit more about the important components of making that solicitation. And then finally, stewardship and gift renewal. So making sure that your community partners or donors are updated about the use of their efforts or financial donations or contributions, and making sure that you maintain that relationship.
I think a really good point that Brittany made was that this, in an ideal world, is a cycle that looks very clean, but in some cases it gets a little bit jumbled. So for instance, when you've gone through identifying the case, evaluating the community, and selecting the fundraising vehicle, you've done a lot of planning up to that point. So hopefully this doesn't happen, but potentially when you solicit the gift, someone says no. And you have to go back to identifying the case or evaluating the community, or perhaps it's the vehicle that you've chosen that isn't quite right. So there are cases where you'll need to check back in to those different components of the cycle.
Yeah, that's a good point. And so now kind of moving into the specifics of each of these components. The first is identifying the case. A case statement is a statement of need for what you're seeking to accomplish. And that could be for your entire program, your entire after-school program, or it could be for a certain lesson or module that you're hoping to implement. It can really be specific to your organization and what your goals are, so remember that. And also remember that the case statement is crucial for when you're talking to community partners. They want it to be really clear what you're trying to accomplish and what the impact will be. So this graphic here, you'll see there's a few different steps when you're trying to figure out what your case statement will be or what your goals are. So the first thing is to address the need. And for this component, you need to ask yourself, what is the problem in the community that you're trying to solve? And make that really clear so your community partners know what you're trying to do. Next, develop the solution. How will that need be solved in your community? And that will be specific to what your need is and what your community looks like, of course. And then third, you need to build confidence in the organization. So ask yourself, how will our organization or program solve this need in a way that no one else in the community can? So this gives you credibility and also helps your community partners have confidence in you. And then finally, create the vision for success. Think about, what does success look like once you've solved this problem, and be very specific about this. Is it giving more youth access to programming? Is it more skills that youth will have? Think about that, because community partners really want to know how their contributions will be used, and they want to kind of know that suspected impact.
I would just suggest that that you not chase money necessarily. I think that's always a problem in nonprofits, is that we overextend ourselves sometimes and chase money rather than have a clear statement of need and purpose. So I think this process of identifying the case is really critical to knowing where your boundaries are. That's not to say that you shouldn't format or tweak your written case statement for particular funders or particular organizations, but knowing what you need and what you want to do is important to knowing when to say no yourself. For instance, there might be funders, and this is the case in our organization, that are particularly interested in STEM. So while we know what our needs are in STEM and we've identified that case, our written or our ask might be different based on the funder because of their interests.
Mm-hmm. And now kind of going into more detail about the case statement, especially if you're kind of writing something up, leaving a one-pager for community partners to look at. This graphic here lists all of the components that community partners might be interested in when hearing your case. So I'll go through them briefly, but there is a lot here. So first is mission, which is arguably the most important part of the case. Because it creates awareness and insight into the problem that you're trying to solve. So you want to make sure you have a strong mission that your organization believes in, obviously, so that community partners have a clear idea about what it is you do for the community and can also see your passion in solving this problem. So your goals is, again, your desired achievement or effect. What do you hope this project, this program will solve? Objectives, what's already in place to solve the problem? What are you already doing? Programs, service to the people, so getting stories, helping community partners see the impact that you're already having in the community. It also helps build credibility for you. And then the next components that are listed here are kind of more into the technical pieces, which I feel are usually more important for financial partners, because they want to make sure that they're investing in something that's sound and that their money is going to good use. So governing board, they want to make sure that you have a strong governance board, advisory council, so they know that the organization of your organization is strong. Staffing, making sure that you have competent and qualified staff to actually complete the program or the project that you are trying to implement. Facilities and equipment, if that's relevant to the program. So making sure that you have the space needed to solve the problem you're hoping to solve. Finances, they want to know what's already in place, what your goals are for funding the program potentially. Just making sure that it's a sound investment for them again. Planning and evaluation. How are you going to report that your strategies are working, and how are you going to plan those kind of measures throughout your strategy and your timeline of your project? And then history, they want to know about your organization, what you've already done for the community, which helps build credibility.
You can see how just plotting this out in written form will help you be prepared for the verbal ask as well, especially if you're like me. Getting on the phone with someone is especially nerve-wracking sometimes, especially if you're making a cold ask. So having this prepared will really help you be more articulate when you're approaching your donor.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, Michelle. You know, sometimes when we're making this ask, we feel really nervous, and sometimes all of these things, which we know by heart, leave our head. And so if you have them prepared in either written format or just like something that you're really familiar with, it'll help make the process less nerve-wracking, I think.
Obviously, this is a lot to put in a single written document. I think the most important elements of this case statement are that it's clear and articulate and concise. So not putting in too much narrative, but just enough that you articulate those in the right hand or the right column there. Next step in the fundraising cycle is evaluating your community. In fundraising speak, they talk about evaluating the market. But here we're talking about evaluating your community. So who are your targets, your potential targets or current targets for making an ask? This is a diagram that the fundraising school uses. And I'm sorry for the watermark, but I had to do some quick copying and pasting and couldn't recreate it myself, but I wanted to be sure to include it here because I think it's a great visualization of how to diagram out your targets. You can see that on the outer ring is the organization's universe. This is all potential people that you could ask. So it's very large, most likely. It's probably your community at large that fits into your universe. And then as you follow through the rings to the center, you're getting closer to sharing values with these people. And most likely your inner circle are people that are already engaged with your organization. So you can see here that in their innermost circle, they've identified the board or your advisory committee, major donors. So 21st Century clearly is a major donor in this case. You might have other funding partners that you consider major donors, and that's all relative. And then management, meaning staff. As you work your way out, they've identified some additional stakeholder groups that could be potential targets for an ask. And remember that this is really geared towards mostly individual donors, but you certainly can include foundations and corporations in this diagram. But it just shows all of the different constituencies that you might be looking for in your community. And having a plan of action for each of those is really critical in your fundraising strategy. So you might spend more time on stewardship in major donors, and then prioritizing reaching out to volunteers, for instance, for a donation or a contribution of some that's beyond their time. You're less likely to just reach out to someone with a similar interest than you are former participants, for instance, of your program that have gone and achieved something within the community, perhaps. You're more likely to reach out to those that value your organization and have an internal connection to your organization.
Yeah, I think that's like the key from this model, is that your inner circles are more likely to be your low-hanging fruit, so to speak. They're the people that already love you and your organization and the work that you're doing. They're familiar with you, so there's less education that has to happen. Not to say that education shouldn't happen to these people too, because they should know your case statement really well as well. So you need to make sure they're familiar with that. But usually in these situations, they'll have much more of an understanding than just some random person from your community or the organization's universe, as the constituency model puts it.
So this is just a strategy for prioritizing your asks. Next, we're going to talk about selecting your fundraising vehicle, and really, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because most likely you're not going to be undertaking a capital campaign anytime soon. But this is just research on the kind of contact that you should be making for each of these different levels of donor. And you can see that, that for first-time donors or a single donor that has less connection to your organization, strategies like direct mail, a benefit, internet or social media, or general earned media are probably good strategies for this type of donor. Renewed or upgraded donors really need personal contact and letters, phone call, or in this case it might be a proposal to a foundation or a corporation. Then if you're getting into a higher level of donation, whether that be a special or major gift, you really need that personal contact again. And then, of course, if you're looking to do a capital campaign, which is really a different beast, personal contact is appropriate there only. But here, most likely in your renewed and upgraded donor level, that's where we're talking about foundations that we don't have existing relationships with. And if they're large donors, either corporate or foundation or individuals, then I would put them in the special or major gift donation. If you're talking about reaching out for products and services, I think it depends on the value of those products and services that are being donated. And then you can decide whether to put them into the first-time donor, renewed or upgraded donor, or special and major gift donor levels.
And now, the most important part of this fundraising strategy is to actually make the ask. This is the most important thing because if you don't ask, people will not contribute things. This is also one of the most uncomfortable parts for many people because we feel bad asking for things, but something that we learned at the training is that you aren't asking for anything that you don't believe will work. So you believe in your organization, you believe in your programs, and you just want to be the conduit so that other people in your community can contribute to the success of the thing that you believe in. So there are people in your community who want to give money, volunteer, their talents, whatever it might be, and you are providing the avenue for them to do that. So you're not doing anything to be nervous about, but you're just helping them share their talents or their gifts with you and your organization.
When at the fundraising school, they talk about fundraising as being a match or an alignment of values. And I think that's important when you consider making the ask. That, like Brittany had said, you have strong values about what your program can offer and should feel strongly about the services that you provide to youth and the community. But in your planning, in creating the case statement and evaluating the community and selecting your fundraising vehicle, however that strategy might play out, you have identified the values of your potential target. And so you're really a mechanism for aligning those values. And so the ask shouldn't be too much of a weight. It's mostly just connecting those values.
Mhm. And so when we're soliciting the gift or making the ask, it's important to kind of, again, prioritize who you should be asking and what you should be asking for. And so on this slide, you'll see that we have the 9-box grid, and going along the side, so vertically, we have interest, and then going along the bottom, we have ability. And so interest is really, how does the community partner feel about you and your organization? So if they feel really good, they already love you, you've already established that relationship, they know about you, they know what you're doing, they would be A, right? So A on this grid. And then if you have a community partner that you've never really talked to, they don't really know much about your program or your organization, they don't really, youth is not their passion issue, they'd probably be a C. So you can see kind of how you'd rate that. And then along the bottom is ability. And so that's kind of their ability to give. So 1 is the highest here. So this is someone who either has like a lot of financial resources, their company has a lot of resources to help you, they have a lot of skills and talent to give. This isn't looking at their interest at all. This is just looking at what they have to give. And then 3, again, is someone who doesn't really have a lot to give. And so your goal area for people you'd want to target would be 1A. So they already love your organization and they have a lot of ability to give and they have a lot to give. This is an activity that I would, excuse me, do with your advisory board or your organization's board so that you're not going to know the interest and ability for every person or every corporation or every potential partner in your community, but there's a good chance that someone on your board does have an idea of this. So coming into a meeting with a list of names or a list of corporations or foundations, these potential partners, and having people on your board kind of go through and have these conversations and do these rankings so that you know where to dedicate your time and make your priorities.
I think that's key, that this is prioritization. It's not to say that 3C should just be thrown out.
Right.
They might just be lower on your priority list based on your limited time that you have.
Mm-hmm.
But they could potentially, with education, rise in interest, and then their financial or time ability might increase, so they could become a 1A eventually. So this is all part of cultivating community partners and not forgetting the 3 C's.
That's right. That's a really good point. And then this slide gets into the logistics of making the ask, soliciting the gift. So who should be part of the team to ask? The ask should not be left up to you or the director of the organization alone. You could ask people from your advisory council, people from your staff, volunteers to go with you to make the ask. And this is beneficial to know because you might be meeting with someone that you don't know personally, but someone connected to your organization does know. So leveraging that relationship can really help and make the difference in whether it's a successful ask or not. When and where should the ask take place? So this really depends on who you're asking and what you're asking for. So maybe it's a quick meeting at a company, or maybe it's an extended meeting over dinner. They say not to do it over dinner, though, because of the interruptions that might take place in a restaurant, but you know what I mean. How much should be asked for? So again, that 9-grid chart that 9-box grid can really help with kind of gauging how much you should be asking for or what you should be asking for. Because you will have already mapped out their ability and how likely it is that you'll have a successful ask. So the next one is what acknowledgement should be offered, and this is kind of going to that stewardship of the relationship and the community partner. So some community partners will want their name put on a building or they want it to be called the John Smith STEM program because they like that acknowledgement, and that's a big part of the driving factor and their motivation for why they are contributing. But other partners might not want any acknowledgement and they might want to remain anonymous. And this isn't something that can be inferred, so make sure that that's a conversation that you have. And then what are the anticipated objections or comeback positions? There is the chance that they could say no to you, and for a variety of reasons. So thinking those through and making sure that you have a response lined up for what they say. And my biggest advice here is to practice these out loud with someone from your team or your advisory council to make sure that you can anticipate what the conversation will look like. So have them play the role of the donor or the community partner, and so you're comfortable and can kind of predict what might the conversation look like.
With this planning, many of you are probably already doing a lot of this, and so it might not be new, but what this does reiterate is that that it's worthwhile to do. The research shows that asking these questions and identifying the team, having a good place and time for the ask, having a clear picture of what the ask is and exactly for what, that case statement. All of these components are based on research and have been found to really cultivate donors very well. So hopefully these set you up for a very successful ask. The final component in that cycle of fundraising, the fundraising strategy, is stewardship and gift renewal. Stewardship is a word that I didn't quite know before this training, and it really means to be a good investment, really. So what are parts of that? The first is to be sure that funders really see the impact of their dollars or their time and services. That could be volunteers, it could be individual donors, major donors. Everyone that gives you a gift of something should get information on your impact. Now that doesn't mean that they necessarily need a personal contact about those impacts. It could just be a flyer or a one-pager on the outcomes that you've achieved that year. But they need to know how their dollars have been invested, or their time or services, and what that outcome or impact has been. Certainly, if you have 21st Century funds, you're reporting to 21st Century, so you can check that off your list. But in some cases, you might have major funders that don't have reporting requirements. An important element of stewardship is reporting to them anyways. This is something that we, as the Iowa Afterschool Alliance, have to be better about ourselves. Just making sure that everyone that provides blood, sweat, and tears to the organization understands our impact. Then Brittany had mentioned acknowledging funders. Hopefully you've received this in writing or verbally, and you can take notes on this so you know. But especially major community partners, you need to know how they want to be acknowledged, whether that be in materials or at events. Maybe you have other strategies for recognizing donors. I know some people do special events for their contributors and their community partners. So that's an important component. And then the gift renewal component is just getting funders or contributors to re-up the next year. Hopefully their gift goes up in time, services, products, or contribution. If you're doing a good job at stewardship, that ask to increase the gift shouldn't be too hard.
I'd also add that stewardship is also important just to maintain the positive feelings in the community about your organization and what you're doing. So even if they aren't going to contribute again, it's important that they had a positive relationship with you and continue to maintain that positive relationship so they can tell others about their positive experience and the impact that you are having.
Finally, this is really just a full comprehensive look at fundraising. So it really is, and hopefully we've gone through each of these aspects. It's the right person, so thinking about your team and who has personal relationships. It's the right person asking the right prospect for the right gift, for the right program, at the right time, in the right way. So if you've done your homework, hopefully the prospect has been identified out of your community and you've done that grid process so you can identify the right gift, whether that be in products or services, time, or money. For the right program, doing your case statement, really understanding what it is that you're seeking to do in the community, what your solution to the community problem is. At the right time, so for foundations and corporations, for instance, they might have deadlines for proposals. Certainly 21st Century does. So identifying the right time for particular donors. Also for instance, during the holidays and after Ramadan are big times to donate, or at the end of the fiscal year or the calendar year. Those are all times where people are thinking about when to donate or who to donate to. And then finally, the right way of asking. So you need to be thinking about all of these things, but this is a really concise sentence on what exactly fundraising is. Hopefully we've given you the tools to be able to do this. We were in training for 4 full days in Kansas City, and so we've narrowed it down to the critical things that you need to know. But we're happy to provide individual technical assistance on any of this. So if you want to dive deeper into any of these components or the fundraising process as a whole, just let us know. We're happy to have a conversation over the phone or come visit you and help create a good community cultivation plan. But I want to leave you with just a few words of wisdom. First is be strategic, so be planful about how you're approaching donors and what you're asking for. Think long term, so think for sustainability of your program, but also think right now. And you are probably used to this, where we usually are caught in the right now versus thinking long term. I think for fundraising, sometimes you can get caught up in one or the other. But for you all, it's really important to think long term and what are your needs right now, and prioritize that way. Be good stewards, so ensure that your donors understand their impact as well as the community at large. And then finally, just ask. This is, like Brittany said, it's often the hardest part of this process, but the most critical. We just need to make the ask and be out there showing that 21st century programs really do make a difference, and programs need community support to be sustainable in the long term. Vic says you should have a regular advisory meeting with your community partners. Community partners, to him, tell Vic that they wish they had more input in working with schools. So this is and this is also an item on site visit checklist. Yeah, so how you are good stewards with community partners really is important to the Department of Education, as well as ensuring that you get gifts again the next year. and you have a good community supporting your program. So that's a good point, Vic. Thank you. I just want to bring your attention to the lower right-hand corner, those files. That files pod is what they call it. We have put together, well, the fundraising school has put together an activity to develop your case. And so you can access that document here, or I'm happy to send it out as a follow-up to this email or this webinar. And then we've included our PowerPoint as well. I'll open it up to questions at this point, but this is what we had for you today. You can go ahead and speak over the phone or type into the chat box. Looks like Barb is typing. Will documents be placed on the new website? Yes, we have a page on our website that is for all of the webinars. So yes, we will be posting that, and along with the recording today. Great, and I'll just reiterate that